What do we need to know about student ministry staffing in 2026? What do we need to pay attention to? And what can we do to improve it? On this episode of Student Ministry Connection, I'm talking with Todd Rhoades about his recent research and what we can learn from it. Let's get ready to connect and grow. Welcome to Student Ministry Connection. My name is Steve Cullum. If you've been listening for the past couple years, you already know that I've been more and more focused on the research that's been coming out, especially around the health of student ministry leaders. I've had my own bouts with some not great work environments, and statistically speaking, I know many of you have as well. So when I was watching a video of Todd Rhoades of chemistry staffing the other day go over the results of their recent research on church staffing health, I immediately started thinking about its impact on student ministry leaders. And I reached out to him right away so that we could talk about it, but also so that we could record it for all of you to hear as well. And this isn't Todd's first time on the podcast. He was actually on back in 2021 for episode 74. And if you've not listened to that one yet, I encourage you to go and do that to learn more about Todd, but to also hear what he had to say about the Great Resignation that we were seeing around that time, and that's still kind of impacting us today. But today, Todd and I discussed the health of student ministry staffing in 2026. And heads up, at times, it might seem like we're focused a little bit too much on the negative, but rest assured, we are going to bring it around to focus on the positive, but also what we need to learn from all this and do based on where we are today. So Todd, thanks so much for being back on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Steve.
Yeah, it's been a little while. And just as a reminder, last time you were on, we talked about this idea of the Great Resignation. And I feel like, from my perspective, I think it's still kind of happening. Would you say the same thing as well?
Yeah, it's, I think it's been a couple of years since we talked. It feels like it's getting a little bit better than what it was a couple of years ago. But yeah, still a lot of disconnection and confusion and all different kinds. It's just different than what it was, say, 6 years ago, 7 years ago.
Yeah. I like how you're careful around that. Yeah.
So I hate to blame everything on a certain event that we all lived through, but that event did change a lot of things.
Yeah.
And we're still dealing with it. Sure.
It definitely did. Yeah. So yeah, I'd encourage people to go back and listen to the last episode. I think there's still some things that we can still gain from that conversation at that point. But yeah, before we jump into what you've been learning through some recent research and everything, I'd love to just pause and give you an opportunity to tell them more your testimony and your background in ministry and how you got to the point where you are today.
Sure. I'll keep it short because nobody cares. Nobody cares about that. Let's just be honest.
We care about connecting.
I don't even care about that. I came to Christ as probably an 8 or 9 year old. I don't know exactly how old I was, but I sensed a call to ministry really early. I was the young kid. I have a worship background, so I was the young kid that was kind of the musician. Had a guy at a large church that kind of took me under his wing, and I just knew that that's what God was calling me to do. So I went to college, was a worship pastor for about 15 years on 3 different church staffs. I was also loved worship, but I also loved technology. And back then, everything was a lot different than what it is now. But, I always tell everybody, I was back when Al Gore invented the interwebs, if you remember those. You were probably throwing diapers at that age. But so I did the worship pastor thing for about 15 years, also started a website, kind of a fluke at the time, called churchstaffing.com. That's kind of how I started serving like a lot of different churches in the area staffing. And that was the end of 1999. So that was 26 going on 27 years ago. That's crazy. Sir, I've served as an elder for about a decade in a church. And then about 9 years ago, Matt Steen and I started Chemistry Staffing. We're a staffing firm. We help churches find what we call healthy long-term fits and help candidates find churches where they can serve. By that, we mean healthy long-term. We're hoping for at least 5 years where you can serve and really do some fruitful ministry in a single church. So that's kind of where I am. And I'm in Ohio. So I don't know what it is. It's kind of sunny, but a little chilly today still.
Nice. I forget, what was did you have an instrument of choice for worship background?
I was keyboard.
Okay.
I was keyboard at the time when keyboard was like the cool thing before, guitar got to be cool. And now it's kind of keyboard again. So,
Yeah.
you just got to ride the cycle.
So before we get into the assessment that we're going to talk a lot about in this episode, what is chemistry staffing? You mentioned that you started that and everything, and it's a staffing firm, but what is it really about, and why do you do chemistry staffing? What's the big why behind it?
Sure. So both Matt and myself have both been on both sides of the spectrum, right? We've served on church staffs. We've also served in church leadership. So we've been employees, church staff, and we've also been those that are hiring and unfortunately firing sometimes church staff. And what we found was that not all churches, but many churches, when it comes to staffing, are just really dysfunctional. That you have lay people that are on search committees that bring a lot of different talents, but they don't have a lot of ministry experience. And then you have candidates that don't really know exactly what to look for or what questions to ask before they take a role. So part of what we wanted to do when we started chemistry 9 years ago is to find a way that we can help repair some of this dysfunction. And youth pastors in particular, I don't know what the current stats are, but I mean, it used to be like 18 months. If you made it 18 months as a youth pastor, you were doing really well. And that just stinks. I mean, particularly if you're married, you got a wife and a couple young kids. And we were talking to people initially, and it's gotten a little bit better, but we're talking to people initially in their mid-20s that were on their third church. And it's like, this just ought not to be. Yeah. So if you're a candidate, what you need to know about chemistry, and go to chemistrystaffing.com. If you're a candidate, we think everybody is special, unique, and valuable. And that means we try to get to know you, and we really try to find out who you are theologically, who you are, what kind of church culture you're looking for, what kind of personality you have, what your skills and abilities are. And then we try and match that up with a church where you're going to be able to do that in a healthy manner for 5 years or more. So we're not just sending out the resumes. We're really trying to connect and make really good, healthy matches. And if you're a church, you're looking for a youth pastor, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to find out as much as we can about your church, what you're looking for, who you are theologically, culturally, what kind of personality your staff has, what kind of skills and abilities you need for this person to do. And then we're going to go out and try and find that person that meets those four things. And that's really where we started with that kind of structure 9 years ago, and it's really worked well. What we find is you just need to have all four of those things, and then you have to have the chemistry. That's why we named ourselves chemistry. You have to have chemistry on top of it. But I mean, you can have a great culture fit, you can have a great personality fit, you can have great skills and ability, but if you're off theologically, it's probably not going to last. And same as you could be good theologically and culturally and personality wise, but you don't have the skills to do the job, it's probably not going to work. So we try to put all those things in sync and hope that God will use that match to do some really good ministry. You can't get a lot done in a year and a half if you're switching every year and a half. Yeah. You gotta be able to stay put and do some really good ministry.
Yeah. I feel like you're just getting started at a year and a half, or even like 3 years. There are different ministries that I've been part of. I mean, I'm hitting my stride at like 3 to 5 years.
3 to 5 years. And I think we're going to talk about that later today as kind of that wall that we found out in some of our research, but we'll get there.
Yeah. So yeah, speaking of the research, you guys have been doing a survey for the last 3 years and really trying to look into this. So what's that survey all about? What's the history there?
Sure. We started this back in 2023, and we call it Church Staff Health Assessment. And it's 50 questions on 7 different categories. We look at communication, job satisfaction, leadership, team dynamics, compensation and benefits, work environment, future stability. Those are the categories we look at. It's 50 questions total. Everything's on a Likert scale, so you kind of tell us how you're doing. And we've done the same questions, same 50 questions for the last 3 years. So we've been able to get a pulse on. This year was our 3rd year, so we were able to finally see some of the trends that are happening. and it's been great. We've learned a lot from it. Some good, bad, ugly stuff. We can unpack some of that if you want to, but I really wish, Steve, that we would have done this like starting in 2020
Mm.
and done, because there were a lot of changes in 2020 to 2023 when we started this that I wish we could have captured. But we are seeing some trends, over time that are kind of really interesting.
Mm. It was funny enough. I when I was in my undergrad, I took one sociology class, and it blew me away how much I enjoyed it. And I think as soon as everything started happening in 2020, like I felt bad, all this horrible things that are happening in our world and everything. But that sociology part of my brain started going, I wonder how this is going to impact society. I wonder how this is going to impact the church and everything. And it's still intriguing to me, like that we're living in one of those times where we've seen some changes.
Yeah, if anything, I've seen, it's it's I'm getting to be an older man, so I've been doing this for, been in ministry for 40 years, if you can believe it. I started right out of college.
Wow.
But the interesting thing, I think, is that it's a fascinating time to be in ministry. I can think of probably no more exciting time to be in ministry, but at the same time, I've probably seen more change in the past 5 or 6 years
Mm.
in ministry, and faster change than I saw in the previous 25 years.
Wow.
It's been crazy, and it continues. So you had everything we've gone through the last 5 or 6 years. Now you've got just quick culture changes that are happening in our country. You got economic stuff that's going on. You've got the whole AI thing that's going to change everything, I'm convinced. So it's just a fascinating time to do ministry. And I know some of the things we're going to talk about today might sound like we're waving the red flag saying everything is horrible, but I'm more bullish on the church and in young people that are coming into ministry than I've ever been.
Mm.
But there's a lot of things to be watching out for as well.
Yeah, I'm right with you. I feel like we're probably a similar kind of place where some of the research I've been doing recently and things that are really breaking my heart, and I connect it to people like Nehemiah, who God, he broke his heart for the people, and he did something about it. And I think that's what God is doing. I think to a lot of us, it's like we're seeing these things, and it's not that we're talking about them because we want to be negative all the time, but these are the things that are breaking our heart because we want something better for the church. We want something better for youth leaders, and if we acknowledge it, we call it out, now we can get better at it, and we can actually take some steps. So you work with different church leaders from all different avenues, but when it comes to youth leaders, because our podcast audience is primarily youth leaders, so I'd love to have you talk about, like, what are you seeing within student ministry, within the jobs, but maybe some of the things that have stood out from your research. What are you seeing in the student ministry world right now?
Sure. Well, let me do this. Let me share a little bit of what we learned in the past 3 years from the health assessment,
Sure.
particularly as it applies to student ministry leaders. And here's where some people are going to listen and say, "Oh, this is really kind of gloom type negative stuff here." But there's some positives that we'll get to as well. But student pastors were our second largest group that took the church staff health assessment. We had about 1,200 people that took the assessment this past year. Every year we've had a little over 1,000 people take it. All staff people, all paid staff people. Okay, so that kind of gives you an idea. And so the bad news, if we want to start off with the overall kind of 30,000 foot bad news, is that of all the different categories, and they're student pastors, senior pastors, executive, campus, worship, kids, student pastors score below the national average. Okay, about 7 points below in our research. Senior pastors, executive, below the average. So out of 250, kind of the perfect score, and nobody got a perfect score, but 250 would be the total maximum you could get. Youth pastors come out around 176, and the national average about 183. So about a 7 point gap. So that's concerning,
Yeah.
not surprising, but concerning specifically for student ministry. The other thing that we're finding is, and this is kind of where we can kind of pull stuff from the last 3 years from the trends, is that the middle is kind of hollowing out a little bit. Okay, now let me explain that. We have six. We take all the scores, and when you take the assessment, you're going to get back a score, and it's going to put you into a category. So the exceptional is the best category. Those are the staff that are thriving. They're doing really, really well. Strong is the next category that's healthy. Good is, you're stable, you're generally positive with some of your challenges that you're facing. Fair is the next category, and fair people are at least the beginning stages of going through some struggles. They've got some real notable concerns that they need to work out if they're going to stay where they are. And then the two bottom categories are needs improvement and critical. Critical are, there's some severe dysfunction here, and there's just, you're probably not going to be in the same role in 6 months or a year. So what I mean when I say the middle is hollowing out, only about not quite 9%, 8.6%. I know this is hard to visualize when you're hearing it, but 8.6% of student pastors are exceptional. Okay, so in that very top category, about 9% think. Nationally, for everybody, the exceptional category is about 15%, 14.7%. So student pastors overall kind of goes with that first stat that I told you, just a little, they're in a not quite as high a category. There are exceptional, people in the youth ministry that score exceptionally, they're just fewer. 25% though, and here's what I think is interesting. 25% of student ministry pastors that took the health assessment are in that fair band, which is, two up from the least. So fair is, the kind of, we categorize it as kind of struggling. You've got some concerns and you're just not really satisfied. You're not feeling really fulfilled in your ministry. So about 1 in 4 student pastors kind of fall in that fair band. And that's compared to about 19% of non-student pastors. So about 6 points higher are kind of in the middle. So that's what I mean when I say the middle is hollowing out a little bit. And then just a couple other things I pulled this morning preparing for our talk today, specifically for student ministries, and then you can poke holes in it and ask me questions or
sure,
tell me off or whatever you want to do. Other things that, and maybe this will resonate with student pastors that are listening. One of the biggest areas of discontent we found for student pastors is when it came to performance and performance evaluations. 44%, and this wasn't just for student pastors, but it was more prevalent even with student pastors. 44% of student pastors told us that that their church really doesn't have a clear or a fair process for performance reviews. So a lot of them are just kind of in this cloud of not knowing, how am I doing? Are you happy with my work? What can I do to improve? So, 44%, I don't want to say almost half, but that's a big chunk of youth pastors that just feel like we don't know how our work is resonating with our board, our senior pastor, or whoever we report to. There's just not a lot of communication there. Compensation, about a third, 29% are unhappy with their compensation. And that's kind of, that's not I'm not surprised at that number. It hovers, between 20 and 30% for all categories, but student pastors are probably a little bit higher, and they probably should be because they're probably being undercompensated most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But the last thing I'll say, and I think this is really important, it comes back so much of everything that, I talked to a pastor yesterday. He said, what can I improve? I said, communication. You just need to be able to communicate. You need to have that conversation with your team and let them know how they're doing. Give them those performance reviews, not just once a year, but sit down with them over coffee and let them know. But this was the stat that kind of stood out to me, is that about 26% of student pastors don't feel like they're being taken seriously by their leadership. And I think that's, I think you had mentioned when we had talked before that one of the biggest things that you've seen that makes a difference between a really successful youth pastor and one that doesn't stick is how well they not only get along with their supervisor, but how well that communication is and how well that feedback is. If they have a mentor or somebody that they can look up to, or somebody that, doesn't hold their hand, but puts their arm around them and said, hey, let's go do this together, or gives them some input. That's huge. That's huge. And a large group of student pastors just don't feel like they have that. They don't feel like they've got the support. And we see this we see this when we're hiring youth pastors, to be honest, when we're talking to churches and they say, hey, we want a youth pastor. There are two really big extremes. The one extreme is the pastor that says, look, God, I don't want to have anything to do with youth ministry. I just want somebody to do it. Right.
Yeah.
And then you've got the other side of the spectrum that says, I'll hire somebody that's never done it before, and I'll mentor them. I've been a youth pastor before. I will mentor them and build into them, and we'll make them a great youth pastor. Those are two really wide extremes, and we talk to both types of churches. But if you're a youth pastor looking to go to a different church, you need to figure out exactly where that church is on that spectrum, and not just the pastor, but whoever you're going to be reporting to. Do they just want the job done and you to be kind of off in the, if they see you once a month and give you the thumbs up, that's that's what you get? Or are they going to really work with you to try and really reach students? That's huge.
Yeah, that's so important. Yeah, and I feel like, I keep talking to youth pastors, and one of the biggest things, the compensation is a thing, things like that. They want to be taken care of, all that stuff. But I feel like through some of my research, but also just talking to youth pastors, I'm seeing the same thing. I think that relationship with whoever is supervising them is incredibly important. And sometimes it can outweigh the other things. If they feel like they're actually supported well and taken care of, then they can even put up with some of the other things that aren't so great, because they know they're really supported from that senior pastor or that supervising pastor, whoever that is.
Well, and another interesting thing we found is that for student ministry in particular, that first year is just golden. Student pastors with less than 1 year scored really, really well. And part of that's the honeymoon period, right?
Sure.
Part of that is, you've got parents that are excited that they have a youth pastor for their kids.
Yep.
You've got the old folks that are going to treat you like a grandkid. They're going to invite you over for dinner and all of that. So that's the good news, is that things usually start off really well. It's in that second and third year. And then when you hit that third year, if you can make it past that 18-month, 24-month, 36-month, it's a challenge to get there for sure. But if you get there, man, that's when it really starts to take off.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I've experienced it myself as well. We said that we're kind of acknowledging the negative stuff right now, but it bothers me that the student ministry leaders are on the negative side of that and under the average. What are, like, you've alluded to some of the things that come out in your surveys and stuff, but as you talk with all these different churches and student ministry leaders who are looking for jobs, why do you think that's the case? Like, what maybe anecdotally, like, what are you seeing that lead them to be on the lower end of the satisfaction scale or whatever?
Because culturally in the American church, student ministries is on the lower end, right? It's the entry level position. It has been for years. It's seen as kind of the starting point. So most churches are but that doesn't meet the reality of the job.
Right.
Okay. So student ministries, their student pastors are the ones that they're on the front lines. They're on the front lines as much as anybody in ministry. And particularly if they're young and they're just, cutting their teeth on ministry. They're the ones that are dealing with the volunteer burnout, with the people that don't show up. They're the ones that are dealing with the parent complaints. They're the ones that are dealing with the student crises that are happening. They're the ones that are trying not to tick people off. And the harder they try not to tick people off, they tick more people off. They're kind of the first line of defense for pastoral care for teens. And we just kind of think, oh, they're just the youth pastor. Well, no, that, that's a horrible way to look at it, but that's the way a lot of people and volunteers and parents even look at it is, you kind of do what we ask you to do and do what we want you to do. So that's, I think, where some of the disconnect comes. I think and particularly if you're a really good student pastor, you're going to have that really good first year. But I've seen this happen over and over, is that if you're good, that job description is going to spread. All of a sudden you're going to find that hey, can you also do young adult? Yeah. We need somebody to step in and do young adults. Or, hey, you're really tech savvy. Can you take over our live stream? It's not like I've got anything else to do. But that's where it's easy for youth pastors to be taken advantage of. And because a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times they're younger and newer in the position, they don't really feel like they've got, a voice that they already feel like they're not being listened to. But over time, I think the job description kind of creeps and they're asked to do more and more, and which just creates more and more hassles and more problems, and nobody sees it. But man, they're living it every day. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I've experienced it myself. Yeah. All of that. For sure.
And at the very same time, so you've got this kind of job description creep where you're doing more and more stuff. But at the same time, the assessments tell us that people don't feel heard and they don't feel like they've got any kind of input that's valuable. They're just kind of the taskmasters that you got to get it done. And a lot of churches either just communicate poorly, or they're only going to tell you you're doing something bad rather than telling you you're doing something right. So I think that's really why we call it flight risk, why there's so much propensity for student pastors to leave in the first 3 years. It's because, the problem is if you're not careful and you just want to get out of a bad situation, you're going to find yourself in a bad situation. That's how you get to be 25 and be on your third church.
Wow.
It's hard. It's a destructive cycle.
Yeah.
It can be.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
That's for encouragement.
Well,
I'm not saying anything everybody that's been in youth ministry doesn't already know.
Right. Yeah. It's just acknowledging the fact of where a good chunk of us are and have been. And yeah, you mentioned in your research as well as this second chair crisis. And I think this kind of goes along with what we're talking about as well. But how does that impact youth pastors? And then the other question of what should we do about that?
Sure. Well, because this is one of the big findings, I think, that we found, putting the trends for the last 3 years. And let me first of all describe what I'm using as second chair leader. Okay. First chair leader would be a senior pastor, an executive pastor, or leadership team. Okay. Second chair leader would be anybody that's not that. All right. There might even be third and fourth chair. I don't know, but we're talking about second chair. So that would be your student ministries. That would be your youth. That would be your worship. That'd be kids. It'd be campus pastors to a certain degree in certain models. Discipleship pastors. Anybody there that's not the senior or the person, kind of the person or the executive pastor. What we found is that in a lot of churches, not every church, we don't want to stereotype, but what the assessment told us is that in a lot of churches, the overall scores will show that there's a pretty good difference between first chair leaders and how they think things are going, and second chair leaders and how they think things are going. So, and usually it's like this. Sometimes it's reversed, but usually 9 times out of 10, it's like this. Senior pastor, executive pastor think things are going great. People love us. They bought into our ministry. They bought into our vision. They're passionate about what they do, and things are going great. Okay. Gets down to the second chair and people are like, what church are you at?
Yeah.
What vision? We don't know what hill we don't even know what game we're playing. So there's a disconnect between senior pastors. And I think the reason that is senior pastors, executive pastors are the ones that are determining, they're determining the vision and the direction, and they like it because it's theirs. the disconnect comes with the communication and just the support for those second chair people. So that's where a lot of the disconnects are. And most student ministries, pastors, guys and gals you're serving from a second chair. So I think this can create some problems. We've seen churches, ultimately collapse because their staff, pastors and executive pastors, leadership thought everything was going great, and then there's mass mutiny. I was at a church once where, we had a senior pastor and 5 staff pastors, and 4 of them were ready to hand in their resignations. Senior pastor thought it was going great. He didn't think there was any problem.
Didn't see it at all.
And we say there. Yeah, and we say this, another way to look at this for pastors. I was talking to a pastor yesterday, and, we get calls all the time from pastors that say, my youth pastor just resigned. Man, he was great. I don't know what happened. Didn't see this coming. No idea. You talk to the youth pastor, he's like, dude, this has been going on for a year. I've been working on my resume for the last 6 months. I've been searching for 2 months, and I just took a job. So that shows the disconnect between first chair and second chair. And so that begs the question, unless we just want to, talk bad about everything and not ever give any kind of, how do you do that when you're in the second chair? I think there are some things that you can do if you're a youth pastor to kind of help with this. The first thing I would say is kind of define it as best you can. And I know some churches are just tough. You can't do this. But try and define the win. Try and figure out, try and get clarity even in writing. Hopefully you've got a job description, and hopefully you've got a supervisor. And, we all have those 2 things. But I would just say be proactive. If you're in a church that you don't feel like they're communicating with you, or you don't feel like they're listening to anything you say, try and be. And it's like, Todd, it shouldn't be my burden to start the conversation. You're right. It shouldn't be. But unfortunately, in some churches, it is. So I would just say be proactive. If nobody's asking you for a one-on-one to tell you how you're doing, ask for the one-on-one to ask them how you're doing. And try to, if you can, get some of that clarity in writing. I mean, just ask questions like, what do you want from me? What am I doing well? What can I get better at? Where do you want my position to be? Where do you want youth ministry to be in the next, 12 months from now? And a lot of times, if you ask that question, you're going to get a little bit of a blank stare back because they haven't really thought about it. They're just thinking about they're going to reach out to you, when they get an angry call from a parent, but that's about it. So try and define the win. I would always also encourage, just to keep a file of, that has your job description in it. And as you're asked to, and we talked about that kind of job description creep, as they ask you to do certain things that aren't in your job description, that's fine. They have the prerogative to do that. But I would keep a note of those just so you can kind of see the progression, so that you can because sometimes it's really intentional, Steve, but most of the time it's not. It's just, hey, can you do this? And then, 2 months later, you're doing a job and a half.
Yep.
You're doing your full-time job plus something else. And honestly, I think that's why we lost so many worship and youth guys and gals in the past 6 years, is because when that event happened, everybody was asked to double up.
Yep.
The youth and the worship guys and gals were the ones that knew the technology. So it's like, hey, can you do our live stream? And then you had to do both online and in person, and all the stuff, and somebody would leave, and now you're doing their job, and you got to fill in for the volunteers that can't come in, and people just hit the wall.
Yeah.
So anyway, and so get stuff down in writing, keep kind of a running log of what you're doing. And then another thing I think that's just really vital is get a network around you. I know, how great is it when, you're able to go out and have coffee with a couple of other youth pastors in town. Yeah. But you need to have that network and that sounding board, that people that you can talk to other than your spouse. Maybe it's a college roommate that's been in youth ministry or something, but but somehow build that support structure around you. So when those hard times hit, when you don't feel like anybody wants to listen to what you have to say, you've at least got somebody to go and be a sounding board. And that's going to help. That's going to help you keep your sanity. The other thing that I would say, and then I'll stop yapping. A lot of times, I think youth pastors, if they're in a hard spot, and maybe it's a church of 200-300 people, you have the senior pastor, maybe an associate pastor, and a youth pastor, maybe a part-time worship guy or gal. A lot of times, I think that we instantly get upset when things aren't communicated well. And I would just say, I think you have every right to, but you got to remember that, and this is what comes out of the assessment as well, is that how you're feeling in youth ministry is also quite possibly how your senior pastor's feeling in his role. So you got to remember that you're dealing with struggles, but they're probably dealing with struggles as well. So I know the younger I was, the more idealistic I was. It's like, this is not right. We just really have no idea what other people are going through as well. Neither do they know what we're going through. So cut a little bit of slack there, because your senior pastor might be drowning too. Now that's not an excuse for poor leadership. It never is, but just make sure that, that you treat them with the compassion that you would like them to treat you with. So that's all I'm saying.
That totally makes sense. And I think, like you said, like a lot of it has to do with this, what you actually call the communication void in your research as well. And like you made it very clear, like it shouldn't be our problem, but hey, this is the situation you're in, and it should be their responsibility. Yes. But yeah, what can we do more? I guess if youth pastors are in that situation, they're listening to this and going, yeah, like I don't have that kind of relationship with my senior pastor. I want to, but I don't feel like it's reciprocated, that sort of thing. Like every situation is so different. But is there anything that youth pastors can do specifically around those friction points that you talk about in Discovery 8, I think, in your research as well? What else can we do to fix that communication void from our seat?
Well, I think asking is the number one thing. And I know some people listening here are just going to say, I can't even ask. Well, if you don't ask, I don't know where to tell you to start. You need to be able to have some open dialogue, and I get it. You want them to reach out to do it. I remember young in ministry, and I had a problem with senior pastor and an elder, and the elders knew about it. Elder took me out to lunch one day. I thought, I'm gonna get it. And I remember him looking at me and saying, Todd, sometimes you just got to be the bigger man. And I remember looking at him and saying, I'm tired of being the bigger man. And so I know what it feels like. And again, it's that second chair leadership tension, particularly when you don't feel like you're being communicated with, that you do have to kind of be the proactive one, even if it goes against the very fiber of your being. You need to try and open up that communication. Without communication, without open communication, you might as well put a big countdown clock on your desk, because without good communication, year and a half, you're not going to beat the odds with bad communication. So whenever you can do that, that's good. Push for those regular, recurring one-on-ones. Again, it might not be that they're ignoring you. It might just be that they're busy. It's not that we always tend to think the worst. They don't want to talk to me. They don't care about me. No, it could be just that they just suck at communication. I've seen that. I've seen that a lot as well. But the reality of it is, you've got to figure out some way. Out of everything that we've learned in our study, we've learned that everything comes back to communication in one way, shape, or form. You can be upset about your compensation, but if there's not a mechanism there to have a conversation about it, it's never going to change. You can be upset about anything or have issues with anything, but if there's not that communication in play, there's really no way to fix the problem. So again, this might sound negative. I don't mean it to sound negative, and it's coming from a guy in a staffing firm. So you think I'm just trying to drum up business. I'm not trying to drum up business, but literally, if you can't, I'm not trying to drive people out, but if you try, if you really now, if you're not trying, then that's on you. But if you're trying to establish that communication and have those conversations, and you're going 6 to 12 months, and it's a stalemate, it may not be a fixable situation, and that might be just. It doesn't mean you got to leave tomorrow. Doesn't leave you got to mean you got to leave next week or in 6 months. But I think that that's important information to kind of put in your back pocket. You know, Matt, my co-founder, when we interview people sometimes, and we're talking about issues like this, one of Matt's questions he'll ask is, how long until you take a hostage? How long can you stay there before you feel like you got to take a hostage? And everybody's fuse is a little bit different. You know, some people have a very short fuse. It's like, no, if I don't find another role in 2 or 3 months, I'm about ready to, backfire on somebody. Other people, man, they can stay 5 years because they just don't want to move and go anywhere, and they stay 5 years too long, and it's just like, that's sad too. So it's always difficult. A lot of our conversations are with candidates that call us and are looking for another role. Is, their big question is, should I stay? Should I go?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things we could do a whole podcast on that for sure.
Definitely.
But if it's important to the longer you stay and you work through the issues, the better chance you have of getting on that health trajectory and having that really healthy long-term fit, right? It's not ever going to be easy. But if you get to the point where it's just fairly obvious that it's not going to happen at your church with the current pastor or whatever, then that's information you need to take into stock and figure out what you're going to do with that, in the next, year.
Yeah. So I know that we alluded to this earlier, but there's different stages of ministry, and you kind of pointed those in your research as well, like year 1, year 3 to 5, and then 6+ years or 15+ years. Kind of thinking those, I mean, they're broad strokes. I want people to check out the research itself, but what does student ministry need to know at each of those kind of milestone stages of ministry?
Yeah, I think, well, we already mentioned year 1. Year one is awesome, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not always, but usually year 1 is the honeymoon. That's what came back for not just student pastors, but most people that working on church staff, is the first year is good. My advice there would be, enjoy that first year, but don't trust it. Okay. Don't trust that it's always going to continue. First year, you're listening a lot more than you're leading. And that's good. It's a lot easier. Well, it's not easier to listen than lead, but that doesn't get you into as much trouble when you're listening and learning as it does when you're trying to do new things and implementing things. Try in that first year not to change a ton of stuff. You're kind of in that learning mode. And that's the time during that first year that you need to try and establish that peer group that we talked about, other youth pastors or other people that you can really trust. And make sure as best you can that you start off on a good foot with the communication. You're going to know, maybe not 6 months in, but at the end of your first year, you're going to know how to gauge that communication, how good it is, how lacking it is, all of that. But in your first 90 days to 6 months or so, that's a good time to just make sure that as best as you can, make sure that you're the open communicator, even if it's not something that your church and your supervisor does naturally. Make sure that you're the person. It's a lot easier to do that in your first 90 days to 6 months than what it is 2 years in, all of a sudden try and break down that communication barrier. So try and start that from year 1. So year 1 usually is pretty good. Where the next significant time is somewhere between years 3 to 5. And we call that the wall. And that's where it gets hard. A lot of times it gets hard years 2 and 3 too, but particularly year 3 to 5, we find that the scores drop with student pastors about 5 points in years 3 to 5. 61% of student pastors at 3 to 5 years have seriously considered leaving in the past year. So that's a pretty significant thing. They're not thinking about it in the first year, but by year 3, 4, 5, they're like, okay. So what's happening here? Well, the honeymoon's over. Year one is over. You've got some of that scope creep that's kind of probably entered in. Your first batch of students is graduating, so you kind of feel like, maybe after the first group graduates, like you finished a cycle.
Mm-hmm.
All different kinds of things to happen in that year 3 to 5. But what I encourage people to do is, don't make, it's going to get tougher before it gets better, but don't make any rash decisions kind of when you're in that fog. You're going to have a good amount of bad days, and don't quit on your bad days. Don't quit. Don't make those decisions on your worst days. And then if you decide that you're going to leave, just make sure you do it well, to preserve the ministry and the legacy of what you've been doing for however long you've been there, and to bless the next person that comes in and bless the church. So, and then the last phase, and unfortunately, a lot of student pastors don't see this, is, 10 to 15 years. If you're in the same church, honestly, you're kind of the unicorn at that point.
Yeah.
If you can make it that long.
Yeah.
Long tenure student pastors are rare and incredibly valuable. What we tell churches all the time, this is our kind of our mantra this year in particular, is if you've got a good worship pastor, a good student pastor, a good campus pastor, communication is so important. You need to try, and if they're just killing it with their job, you need to do everything you can to keep them on your staff. I mean, sometimes God calls you away, and I'm not saying the Holy Spirit can't move you on.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, bottom line is, if you're a church, if you're a pastor, it is so much more costly to replace staff than what it is to retain staff.
Yeah.
So appreciate the people that you have, and do what you can to keep them on your team. People don't realize, I mean, student pastors leave. First of all, you're going to lose momentum. You're going to lose a great guy or gal, hopefully, but the replacement cost and the search cost, and then there's a possibility you might not get it right. I just talked to a church yesterday, or knew of a church yesterday that, a year and a half ago, hired a student pastor, made a bad decision. Here they are, and they were looking for 6 months before. So here they are 2 years in, and they've got, volunteers that are, unhappy and worn out, and they got to start the search process all over. And they've lost 2 years of youth ministry.
Yeah.
Because they just didn't hire well. So that's again, part of our passion behind it.
Sure.
We just want to help churches and help people get in the right seats.
Yeah. Well, and it's so important. And I think a lot of, I mean, maybe if you're not really paying attention to it, like those of us in student ministry and you're in staffing kind of positions, it makes a lot of sense. But if we really do believe those teenage years are the critical years, then losing 2 years is a big deal.
It's huge. It's huge. Yeah. It's huge. And, and that's where, so I think things are starting to come around a little bit. I kind of joke, 10 years ago, youth pastors were probably some of our easiest roles to fill. There were a lot of youth pastors out there, and we just lost a lot of people. Today, youth pastors are some of the hardest jobs for us to fill, because there's so many churches that are looking for youth pastors. So I think, Steve, that we were spoiled. The church was spoiled for so long. It's like, if we lose our youth pastor, we'll just hire another one.
Yeah.
It's, first of all, now it's not that simple. Now you're looking at some time to find the right person, and because it's harder. But at the same time, man, I don't think those people had teenagers, because I had, my kids had essentially, we had 4 kids 2 years apart, and they essentially had 1.5 youth pastors. I mean, there was overlap. But, I look at churches that go through, youth pastors every 1 to 2 years. I mean, there's no continuity for those students. And if, like you said, if we're really convinced that we gotta reach the hearts of our teenagers, and that they're the future of the church, then we gotta start taking this stuff seriously. And that means taking our staffing seriously.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Todd, you've shared so much good stuff. I want people to read the research and stuff too, but I know there's probably a lot of people who are listening right now and maybe they've got pages of notes that they've been writing down and all these different things that they need to work on. But what's just one thing that maybe they can take away that you just really like to encourage those who are listening to do very soon? You can work on all these different things, but what's something we can start to put into practice right away?
I feel like I'm beating this drum today for some reason. The one thing, and either you have this going for you right now or you don't. Okay. From the assessment results, I think at least a third of student pastors don't with the whole communication thing. Is again, be proactive. Try to schedule an actual one-on-one meeting. If you've not had one in the past 30 to 60 days, just over coffee or get out of. I would encourage you to get out of the office and go just sit down and have a conversation. Not the hallway check-in, not the sit in his office or her office, a real meeting. It's on the calendar. If you can get that scheduled for, every week, every other week, once a month or whatever, that's, I think, huge. If you don't have that kind of rhythm with your supervisor now, I think that's the most important thing you can do. And then that's going to tell you a lot. If you ask for the meeting, again, you might not think you need to ask for the meeting, but if you ask for the meeting and they're not available, that's going to give you some information, right? If you ask for a recurring meeting and they always blow you off, that's going to give you some information. If you ask for a recurring meeting and it's horrible, that's going to give you information. But if you ask for the one-on-one meeting and you actually are able to cultivate the relationship and ask them, and have that, kind of that mentor and that peer and that person that kind of gives you honest feedback, then you're going to be ahead of a lot of student ministry pastors out there. So, I mean, it sounds really kind of, it's not rocket science, but if you can have that kind of conversation, again, the data is pretty overwhelming that if you have a good relationship with your supervisor, it's going to make it much easier for you, number one, to stay where you are for a good period of time. And number two, to do some really fruitful ministry because they're going to have your back.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised what you can do when somebody has your back and believes in you.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah. So.
Todd, I know people are going to want to connect more with you online, follow up questions, find all about your research, maybe even connect with you guys about what you do with chemistry staffing. So how can people find you online and connect more with you?
Sure. I'll give you a couple of different URLs. Chemistrystaffing.com is just go there. There's a candidate button. There's a church button according to what you're looking for. Happy to connect with you there. If you're interested in just reading more about this church staff health assessment that we did, it's almost 200 pages. If you're a geek and you like numbers, you can get that at churchstaffhealth.com. It's a free download. You can do that. We're going to be doing the assessment again, same exact assessment again this fall. So when we do that, you can go and you can get on our mailing list and we'll send you a notice when that comes out. So those are the two or three areas. Also do a podcast called the Healthy Church Podcast. Everybody that's listening to this loves podcasts. So here's another one for you. You just go to chemistrystaffing.com/podcast and it's 5 to 7 minutes Monday through Friday. We just do a quick thing about what's ever on my mind that I think church staff might be interested in or be valuable for them.
Todd, I'm so grateful for all that you've done for the ministry world, but specifically for the student ministry world. You've seen the ups and downs and everything in between and trying to really make a difference. I think that's one of the things I love about you and Matt, but also just what you've been able to build there at Chemistry Staffing is really the care. You're not just filling positions. You really care about the churches and the individuals who are looking for those positions and going beyond to provide church health. And so thank you for all that you're doing and just pray that God continues to bless it all.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity to talk today, Steve. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. If it was helpful, please share it with others in student ministry and consider giving it a positive review on your podcast app. And if you'd like to support this podcast and my ministry with National Network of Youth Ministries, go to nnym.org/Steve Cullum, or you can follow the links in the show notes or on studentministryconnection.com. And if you're looking for a speaker, Head to youthmenhub.com/speakerhub to find me or many other speakers you can book for your next youth group event or training. As of this episode's release in May of 2026, I do have a few speaking opportunities already lined up for this summer. So if you think about me, please pray that God speaks through me and uses all of these for His glory. We'll be back in a couple weeks with our next episode, so make sure you're subscribed on your podcast app or on YouTube so you don't miss it. And until next time, be sure to stay connected, and may God bless your ministry.